On Valentine's Day of 2016, I took my girlfriend out to a nice restaurant for dinner. After we finished, I drove us to the beach because we always liked taking nighttime walks along the shore. The cool breeze, the sound of the waves, and the quiet surroundings make it feel serene and tranquil, but something about that night felt different. I parked the car in a lot that most people don't use because it's far from the pier, the lighthouse, and other popular spots on the beach. This time, I chose this location because it was Valentine's Day, and we wanted some privacy. We backed the car into a spot so we were facing the long road we had driven on to get to this quiet area. The parking lot was a little lower than the road, with a small slope leading down to it. We were enjoying the quiet night while I told them some scary stories I had read online. We had been there for about half an hour when we noticed a truck's headlights on the road above us. At first, I wasn't concerned because I knew that people frequently sped down that road because there were no places for police to hide. But something about the way this truck was moving felt different. The truck was traveling so fast that it appeared to lift off the ground for a brief moment as it approached the parking lot. I told my girlfriend to duck down in her seat and did the same because I didn't want the driver to see us inside the car. At the same time, I grabbed my keys and prepared them in the ignition in case the truck stopped in front of us. My fiancée was obviously anxious, so I attempted to lighten the situation with a joke since I've seen a lot of terrible movies and read a lot of terrifying tales, and I didn't want us to become the next victims in the Lover's Lane saga. She didn't laugh or even react when I told her that some people were merely rushing to get to their Valentine's Day activities. The truck rushed by us, blowing up dust as it went, and it eventually stopped about 50 yards away close to the point where the sand and pavement met, but something seemed strange. Rather than parking correctly, it abruptly stopped at a strange angle, as if the driver hadn't even attempted to straighten it out. The engine continued to run, and the glow of its brake lights could be seen piercing the night. The Bree men got out of the truck and ran straight toward the water, shouting loudly because it was 9 o'clock at night. After a few minutes, everything fell silent again, and my girlfriend and I began to relax. However, less than 3 minutes later, the men ran back to the truck, jumped in, and drove off, just as quickly as they had arrived. My girlfriend and I decided to leave, and we drove away quietly, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. The following day at work, during lunch, I told one of my coworkers about the strange experience. She pulled out her phone to see if anyone had posted about it online, and to my surprise, she found an article about an encounter at that beach, and it was exactly what I had just described. The news article stated that a man was attacked on the HMA pier on Sunday night, and the incident happened around 9:15 p.m. Since the victim was a 20-year-old Oxnard man, it was obvious that the men in the truck were responsible because they fit the description in the article and everything was in order at the time. I didn't call the police because I didn't know much about cars, especially the Mon model, so I couldn't even tell them basic information like the truck's color or type, which made me feel like I couldn't be of any assistance. I also hoped that someone else could provide the information they needed because it was so dark in that parking lot that I couldn't see the men's faces or any other crucial information about them. I assumed that they drove to our parking space and fled to the beach in order to remove any evidence that might connect them to the attack. I had a close friend named Eleanor, and we met during my year 10 studies and quickly became best buds. She had just moved from Sydney with her older sister. Because of family problems, they didn't have a permanent place to stay, so they were living in a small room at a short-term housing place. Eleanor didn't talk much about her family, but I could tell things had been tough for her at that time. My living situation wasn't stable either, and I was sleeping on the couch at my ex's place. Even though Eleanor didn't have much, she let me stay with her, sharing half of her bed. Then, after a while, I made things right with my parents and moved back home, but Eleanor and I stayed very close and spent every day together. When her sister decided to leave the short-term housing and move in with her partner, I asked Eleanor if she wanted to stay with me at my family home. Eleanor said yes and became my roommate. We even kept sharing a bed. This never felt strange to me, as we were already used to being in a small space at the shared house. Now, during that time, I was in a relationship with a man and had been with him for over a year before meeting Eleanor, but because of some problems we lived separately, so she never had to deal with him being in our room. 2 years later, my relationship with that guy was over, but Eleanor was still a big part of my life. We were even still living together the same way. Then, after a while, it turned out that Eleanor and I liked the same guy, but unfortunately for her, he was interested in me. I thought this might be a problem for our friendship, but she insisted it didn't bother her. She even seemed truly happy that I had found a nice guy. We started dating, and I mostly stayed at his place to avoid awkwardness, since I knew Eleanor liked him too, but sometimes he would stay over at our place. When that happened, Eleanor slept in the spare room so we could have the bedroom, and she never seemed to mind. If anything, she became even more attached to me when he wasn't. She even gave me a Valentine's Day ring, which is when things start to get spooky. One night, while my partner and I were sleeping, Eleanor had already packed her belongings and gone to the other room. We had been asleep for a few hours, and it was most likely around 1 or 2 in the morning. The room was completely dark with no light at all. To this day, I don't know what made me wake up, but I'm glad I did. I slowly opened my eyes to the dark room, and for a moment I thought I saw a figure in the darkness. My partner was still asleep, so I grabbed his arm and said, "I think someone's standing by the bed." I turned on the light right away, and he was ready to fight whoever dared to be in the room. To our surprise, when the light came on, we saw Eleanor just standing there. Her only explanation was, "I forgot something." Then she left the room like nothing was strange. She didn't take anything with her. My partner and I were really confused, but our confusion turned into concern when we realized she had just been standing there in silence while we were lying in the dark, wondering if someone was in the room. Then the fear of how long she had been there and what she had done while we were asleep started to worry us. We barely slept that night, waiting for the next day to get more answers. But when the day came, Eleanor was distant. She stayed close to other people in the house, probably to avoid talking about it. She also left to stay with her sister as soon as she could, avoiding any one-on-one time with me or my partner. Less than 2 weeks after that incident, she went to stay with her sister and never came back. I had to take all of her things to a family member because I couldn't reach her at all. I still wonder why Ellen acted so strangely. She had never done anything like that before, and I had known her for years. My partner and I are still together 5 years later, and we both get goosebumps whenever we talk about what happened. It was really strange and scary. When I was 20, I moved to Texas to live with my uncle, and we had an agreement I didn't have to pay rent as long as I helped around the house and looked after my younger cousins. I also found a job at a well-known coffee shop downtown near the busy tourist area. A few months into the job, I had become good friends with my coworkers, and on this day, one of my coworkers was working their last shift. That morning, 3 men had been in the shop. For hours they hadn't bought anything and were just sitting there, but that wasn't unusual for this location. During my break, I walked to a nearby store to buy a farewell card and maybe a small gift for my coworker. As I stepped outside, I put in my earphones, but before I could play any music, I heard the door open behind me. I noticed footsteps following me. Someone caught up and started walking right beside me, matching my pace. When I turned to see who it was, I realized it was one of the men who had been sitting in the shop all morning. He asked for my number, and I politely said no, but he didn't give up. Annoyed, I told him to leave me alone. He stopped and stared at me, shocked. I guess I didn't seem like the kind of person who would speak up or be rude. I kept walking, and when I got back to work, he and the other guys were gone. I told my coworkers what happened, and we laughed about it. I thought that was the end of it, but I was wrong. After that day, he showed up during every shift. Sometimes he was already there when I arrived, and other times he walked in while I was working. Sometimes he brought someone with him, but other times he came alone. My schedule changed a lot. Some days I opened, some days I closed, and sometimes I worked in the middle of the day. But no matter when I worked, he was always there. I started feeling uneasy. I kept noticing him staring at me. He never ordered anything, never talked to me, and luckily didn't follow me. He just sat there. I told my coworkers about it, and they started noticing too. One of my team leaders helped by sending me to the back to wash dishes or organize the cooler. My coworkers also tried to stand in a way that blocked his view of me. I started feeling uneasy at work. When I closed, a coworker would walk me to my car before heading home. If I didn't close, they would still walk me to my car and then go back to work. One day, after weeks of him just staring, he finally walked up to the counter while I was working the register. He ordered a water. I asked for his name for the order, so now I knew his first name, just in case he took his water, and sat down. I had told my manager about him before, but since he hadn't really done anything, there wasn't much we could do except write it down in the manager's book. The next day, I worked with my manager, two other coworkers, and I told them I needed to use the bathroom quickly. There were two bathrooms next to each other, hidden from the coffee bar and register, and they weren't for any specific gender. I walked around the bar to the lobby area, passing his table on the way to the bathrooms. I saw him get up. Before I went inside, I sat down, and while I was in there, someone started rattling the doorknob. I yelled that it was occupied, but they kept rattling the door until I was done. When I opened the door, no one was there. On my way back, I saw him adjusting himself back into his chair. I walked around the bar to the lobby area, passing his table. On the way, I saw him get up and go to the restrooms. I sat down, and while I was inside, someone started rattling the doorknob. I yelled that it was occupied, but they kept rattling the door until I was finished. I was terrified, so I told my boss about it, but he was unable to speak to him because I didn't have any proof that it was him. Later that shift, the man got up and took a coffee from the pickup area. My boss assumed he had ordered it, so he let him have it. I told him it wasn't his, and that his name wasn't even on the cup. My boss used this opportunity to warn him that if he did something like that again, he wouldn't be allowed to return. The man apologized and complied with the rules. After that, it was Valentine's Day, and I was supposed to stay late on specific Thursdays to thoroughly clean the store. He was peeking through the window with both hands pressed against it on one of those nights when we were almost done and I had to clean the bathrooms as one of the last chores. His eyes were wide and he was staring at me intensely. I froze for a moment, just staring back, when I noticed a purple foam heart on one of his palms pressed against the window. He didn't move it at all. I freaked out and ran back into the bathroom, screaming for help, but Hannah could hardly hear me because of the loud music we were playing. Hannah was the team leader and knew how afraid I was of him. Hannah yelled, "What are you saying?" as she approached the restroom. As soon as she noticed him, I reminded her that he was there and was observing me. She then began yelling through the window, You need to leave. If you don't leave, we're calling the police." I stepped out a little to see if he would leave, but he ignored her and kept staring at me. I quickly stepped back into the bathroom and Hannah kept shouting at him to leave and threatened to call the police. About 5 minutes passed and he realized I wasn't going to leave until he did, so he finally left. The next day my team leader and I told my manager that I wanted to file a police report. He told me to wait until he talked to his boss. When I got home, a friend convinced me to call the police, so I texted my boss and told him I didn't care what he or his boss said. I was scared and I was going to file the report anyway, so I dialed 911 and gave them a quick summary of what happened. They told me they were going to send officers to my house to take the official report. The 2 officers were really nice and supportive. I told them the whole story, including how my boss didn't think it was serious enough to call the cops. Since I wasn't hurt, the officers told me I should have called right away and defended me. I thanked the officers and they told me that if he shows up again I should call 911. A few months later, when I felt safe again in downtown, I went out for a walk with some friends. We were close to my place of employment when I noticed him, so I quickly ducked into a small store. My friends followed me, and I told them I saw him, so they kept an eye out. After he was out of sight, we left the store. This occurred when I was around 13 years old. My family and I were on vacation in Cancun with my parents, brother, and 5 of my cousins and their parents. During the day, we did our own things, but at night, we all gathered at the resort for dinner. On Valentine's Day, one of the adults stayed at the buffet to chat, while the children spent the rest of the evening by the pool. I left my candy in the hotel room where my family was staying. After dinner, I was hanging out with my brother and cousins by the pool. 2 of my cousins decided to return to their room to get their candy, and I thought it would be entertaining to join them. Their room was just next door to ours on the same floor of the hotel. The hallway was quiet and we all walked together, but one of my cousins needed to use the bathroom, so I waited for them outside in the hallway. While I was waiting, I saw a man walking up and down the hallway. He was tall, or at least he seemed tall, as I was a short 13-year-old. He was bald, and might have had some facial hair, but I'm not sure. He was wearing a shirt that looked like one my dad has from the band the Eagles. It was gold and white, or maybe gold and black, but I don't remember it clearly. He kept walking up and down the long hallway of the hotel, pacing back and forth. I was standing near the door waiting for my cousin on his 3rd lap. He said hi to me as he passed by and I just nodded back, feeling a bit weird. He didn't stop, just kept walking like it was normal. On his 4th lap, I noticed from a good distance that he was holding a drink in his hand. It looked like a beer or something like that. I swiped my key card to unlock the door and was about to step inside my room when I turned around and saw him standing right behind me. I had only taken a couple of steps into the room and my hand was already on the door handle to close it. He was standing so close that if I shut the door I would have been stuck in the room with him. He wasn't fully inside, but he was close enough to make me feel trapped. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything, but somehow I managed to ask in a calm voice, "What are you doing?" Even though I sounded calm, I was terrified inside. He just stared at me. I felt frozen for a moment, but then I quickly decided to shut the door. As soon as I pushed, I felt him press back, trying to keep it open. I didn't say a word, and neither did he. I leaned my body weight against it, not stopping. Even when I heard the door lock automatically, I stayed there for a few moments, still pressing against the door, making sure he couldn't get in. I stayed calm and called my mom, trying not to cry even though I really wanted to. While all of this was happening, my cousins were still in the other room. After I shut the door, they came out and thought I went downstairs to the lobby to wait for them. A lot of other things happened with my dad and his cousin trying to find the man, but I stayed in the room waiting for my mom. It's a more complicated story than I'm sharing, but I'm only telling my part. About 15 minutes later, while everything else was going on and my family was in the lobby all worried about me, the man was eventually taken downstairs by hotel security, who immediately began questioning him. As for the background, the man had actually stolen a walkie-talkie from the hotel security. When my parents arrived, the man was still standing there, and my mom was telling me everything while we were in the lobby. My dad then approached the man who was still being questioned by security and asked, "Did you go into my child's room?" The man simply stared at him and didn't respond, and without saying anything more, he turned to the security guard and instructed them to handle the situation. The man was eventually escorted out of the building, and my parents remained near me to make sure I was okay before we returned to our room.